So hello, everyone. Welcome to Ask the Grant Writing Expert. I'm Dr. Meg Bouvier. You know me as the creator of your library of NIH grantsmanship courses. I have over 35 years of experience at NIH as an applicant, an intramural researcher, a staff writer, and now as a full-time NIH grant editor and mentor. So I've helped clients land over $500 million in federal funding, and I'm here to answer your questions today. So let's grab a cup of coffee and get started. So a reminder for those of you who are watching this live, you're in listen-only mode. Feel free to type your questions into the Q&A box. We'll be monitoring that section for questions. If you have something you want to share that isn't a question, feel free to put it in the chat box. And if you are watching this as a recording, today is May 31st, 2023. So everything we say is true to the best of our knowledge today. But do always check at NIH to make sure that whatever we're saying is still accurate when you're viewing this, because things change very quickly at NIH. In terms of what you should be watching in the library right now, it really depends on where you are in the cycle. So if you're still targeting cycle 2 deadlines, which would be June and July, as I'm sure many of you are, you probably want to be watching things like checklists to avoid top mistakes, things like that. And if you are an early bird gearing up for the cycle 3s, congratulations. That's what we love to see. You probably want to start watching some of the preparation videos. So that would be, for example, Master the R series, part 1 preparation. In terms of updates, I'm sure all of you are sick of hearing me say this, but I'm going to shout it from the mountaintops that NIH has ended its COVID era policy about allowing preliminary data as post-submission material on all mechanisms. And but happily, that's the bad news. The good news is that they've now implemented it as a permanent policy for certain mechanisms. It would be the R01, the R21, and I believe the R03, if the mechanism allows post-submission material. So that's great news, because prior to this, it was just things like updates to publication. So now it's going to be actually preliminary data you can update as a permanent policy up until 30 days before your study section meets. So I'm going to pause here to introduce our guest. We're going to welcome back again David Widmer. Dr. Widmer is the principal at Widmer DHJ Research Development Strategies, and he's here as a guest to answer our questions today. David, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure, thanks, Meg. So I have always been an educator. I started off in 7th and 8th grade, educating in biology. And then I also had 6 years in the lab as a neuroscientist, and also 22 years in research administration, research development, starting as a grants manager, ran the sponsored projects office there, and then ran a funding development team. So yes, I'm here to answer your questions and also make a plug for the things you might have forgotten to do on these last days before the deadline.
Yeah, so as I said, it's May 31st right now, and the new R01 deadline is the NIH drop deadline is June 5th. I don't think either one of us would advocate for anybody uploading on June 5th because the traffic in the portal is terrible. And if your application is not time-stamped by 5 p.m. on the day, a local time, on the day of the deadline, you're out of luck. You're going to have to wait 4 more months. So for big deadlines, like the biggest deadline at NIH for the grants.gov portal is the new R01 deadline. So if you can at all avoid it, don't upload on June 5th. Try to avoid that for those of you who are responsible for uploading. So David, what should people be doing in these final few days other than panicking?
Yeah, I just made a top 10 list as a former grants management specialist. So this is going to focus on NIH. You may be submitting elsewhere, but let's just focus there. And just be aware too, there may be a different setup in your institution, but I tried to make them most general. So first off, hopefully you've contacted your grants manager or your department manager, whoever is going to be reviewing and then sending forward to whatever institutional signatory you have at your institution. Because remember, grants are submitted to the federal government as an institution. You are not doing so. You're doing as the PI confirmed by the institution. Make sure that your budget is correct, matches your budget justification, has correct indirect cost rates and fringe rates that are associated with your particular institution. Commons IDs, that's a big last minute mistake, because that in most system to system submission portals will stop your application dead. You need to have a Commons ID. In your institution, in my institution, there were animal research subject checks, IRB for human subjects, checks for proprietary information from like a tech services department. And then in a system to system delivery to NIH of your application, are there other forms that are required by your institution to be submitted? Your bibliography, pay attention to PMCID numbers so that you are compliant with the public access policy. Sometimes there's nomenclature required and file format required for your uploads. And then also something I always told my investigators is be aware that your title, narrative, and abstract are public information. So make sure that proprietary information is not shared there. And definitely use that study section assignment form if it's appropriate. Don't let the Center for Scientific Review run blind in assigning you to a study section. Okay, I'm done with my GMS plugs.
So I'll follow up on a couple of those things. So one question I got this week was whether or not a submitted publication could be listed in the biosketch. And the answer to that, to the best of my knowledge, is you can mention it in the personal statement, but unless it's actually in press, you can't list it as a publication itself. You know, there are several places where you can list publications in the biosketch. One is at the bottom of the personal statement in section A. So there you're going to pick your juiciest publication. So it should be some combination of the most recent, the highest impact journal, where you're first or last author or most relevant to the proposed project. And you have to make a judgment call about how many of those boxes you can check for any given publication, but you can list up to 4, I believe, of those at the bottom of the personal statement. And then, of course, you can list up to 4 after each of your contributions to science, and you can repeat them from the section A. It can be a repeat of those, but they have to be at least in press. So the workaround for that is that if something is submitted, you know, like maybe you're, you know, a little light on publications and you're trying to show productivity, mention it in text form in the personal statement that you have something submitted. And, you know, you might even alert the reviewers. You might say it's submitted and we anticipate updating publication information as post-submission material. You could say that in text form in the personal statement, because I keep hearing applicants tell me that they're not always convinced that reviewers are going and reading the post-submission material. So I've been experimenting this cycle with having applicants actually say in the personal statement of the biosketch, we anticipate updating that information as post-submission material. You're not
Oh,
promising anything. You're not saying it's going to be published before we, because you can't say that. But at least you're alerting to reviewers that they should go look at the post-submission material. I'll let you know how that goes. That's just like kind of a thing that I'm kind of trying out to see if that works. I am as inexplicable as this is, I'm still finding that lots of applicants have no idea what an assignment request form is. This seems really, and so this is something David just mentioned. So the assignment request form is a 2-page form. Those of you who have been around the NIH world for a while, you're accustomed to making requests in your cover letter for things like study section and institute, things like that. CSR doesn't look for them there anymore. They're going to look for them in the assignment request form, which is a 2-page form that came about. It's been a number of years now. It was several form sets ago that they implemented it, and it's actually undergone several changes already. You used to be, when it first came out, you could make negative requests, as in send me to this study section. Don't ever send me to that one. They stopped doing that. But they do have a text box now where you can make a justification about your study section request. And in it, I have had people say, this is a better choice for my project compared to that study section because of X, Y, and Z. So it's a little bit of a workaround for people who keep getting assigned to what they feel is the less optimal study section. In my experience, once you're assigned to a study section, you ain't moving. Like, I've never seen anybody be able to change. Like, if anybody has experience with that, let me know. But in my experience, I've never seen anybody get their assignment changed after the fact. Try to do what you can. It's no guarantee, but try to do what you can to be assigned to what you feel is the optimal study section. And as David said, don't leave it to chance. That's not your best idea.
and for the most part, I've found that CSR, the Center for Scientific Review, takes into account your suggestions. They are actually welcoming some guidance, and as to why you think it is the best for you.
Yeah. And you would make ICU requests there too. I think you can make up to 3, the primary and then decreasing preference. And you can, if there's anybody on the roster who you feel is in conflict somehow, you can list that on the assignment request form as well. And you have to say why you feel that they're in conflict. So, and again, in my experience, you can't say that we don't agree scientifically, like that. I've seen people say, but he just doesn't agree with my theory about X, Y, and Z. And it's like, well, that's fair. Like he's a reviewer. He shouldn't recuse himself because he doesn't agree with you scientifically. That's usually not a reason.
Not our reason, right?
Else. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like,
Meg, let me mention something and ask your thought about this. I always recommended that they do choose a second IC
yes.
if it's applicable, because of the potential for picking up something that the first IC. So you do the same?
I mean, if at all possible, sometimes it really just isn't. But if at all possible, I even have people list in office because there are, so for people who on the call who don't know, the difference between an office, a center, and an institute at NIH is the size of the budget. Office is small. They're not going to typically sponsor their own R01s. Centers, you're starting to get a juicier budget and you might be able to sponsor some R01s, and then institutes are the bigger ones. Offices, they may become like a secondary or even a tertiary sponsor. And the nice thing about offices being involved in it is that they have a voice. So let's say you go to like NHLBI, a big institute, hard to speak with the program officer, but you have like the Office of Women's Health involved. That program officer is much more available to take your call, and they are sometimes good advocates for how the project should be structured, or if you need troubleshooting during the course of your project. Maybe your recruitment numbers are low or something, and you want to talk it over with a program officer, which, by the way, you absolutely should do. Don't wait until annual reports. Program officers don't want to yank your funding. It's the last thing on earth they want to do. They are your advisors, your advocates, and if you're having problems with something, don't hide it. The best thing you can do is talk to the program officer about it, and engage them early in the process to help troubleshoot whatever the problem is. But again, like sometimes out in office, the program officer is more available for a conversation like that. So yeah, if at all relevant, they should list more than one for sure. So we do have more people who have logged on. So I just want to remind people, we're happy to answer your questions. I don't know if people are just kind of like in a coma after this. I think I finished my last R01 review yesterday. I know I'm in a bit of a coma. Like you can probably see there's a photo of me there. You see how long my hair is? I haven't had time to go get hair. So, even though I'm feeling better rested when I show up with shorter hair. Yeah. So so I think everybody's in a little bit of a daze, but we have to start shifting our gears soon. I'm moving on to the short format R's and the K's and the resubmissions in the next week or two, but I've already got cycle 3 folks who are knocking on my door, wanting their consult to talk things over, and I'm proud of them. Like that
We
is
love those PIs. So yes, cycle 3 at the end of May. Amazing.
Yeah, it's the best. So, and getting back to what David was saying, a good pre-award support office is going to have that checklist. And speaking of not waiting to the last minute, your pre-award support office is only as good as the amount of time you give them to do their job.
Right.
So make sure that you're not waiting until the 11th hour to send them the application, because they won't be able to do their due diligence to make sure that the application is complete and accurate and thorough. And there is zero margin for sloppy errors at NIH. There was an article, I don't know if you remember this, David, when Nakamura was the head of CSR, he co-authored an article, I think with Sally Rocky, who was then the director of extramural research. It may have been back in like 2015 or something. And they actually shockingly said the top 20% of NIH applicants, the quality clusters so tightly that they did not feel that the review process did a particularly accurate job of stratifying based on quality. So that's a pretty disturbing thing, I thought, to say, but probably pretty true. So this is why it becomes so important to make sure that, there's no room for a sloppy error. Reviewers are looking for any excuse to toss you on the triage pile.
I was just going to say that, yes, there are so many applications that if there is a sign that you didn't do your due diligence ahead of time, it makes it very easy for them to say, I kind of doubt that this person's going to finish their project correctly.
Yeah, yep. Yeah, all else being equal, they're going to toss the person who left out a letter of support. And sometimes it's an upload problem. I actually had an applicant where it was an upload problem. He had a complete application, but it didn't upload properly. And unfortunately, nobody checked to make sure that the entire package uploaded. So one of the letters of support, it was like a partial, like it was like a 2-page thing and only 1 page uploaded. And he was triaged for that. They were just like, no, so. All right, we have a question. I have an R01 that was reviewed and got back major critiques that our method was a black box. We use deep learning, which is a black box. Should we be concerned the study section is not appropriate? Yeah, I'm going to go with yeah on that one. In an instance like that, where they ask for major critiques and you're kind of left scratching your head, like, yeah, like, did you not understand? And I mean, this, I hear this probably weekly. I mean, have you,
Those
yeah, it's pretty disturbingly common for an applicant to say, wow, this study section just really didn't get it. They missed the point in a big way. There are several things you could do. I would encourage you, as you've said, first and foremost, to go back and reassess whether this was the appropriate study section. And you could do that by looking at the roster, and seeing if you recognize the names on it. If you've been in your field a while and you don't recognize a single name on the roster, that might be a little bit of a red flag. At least look at the types of expertise represented there. The other thing you can do is go back and do that CSR ART search where you take your Ames page and your title, and I think your abstract, I think you can load all three in, and plug it into the CSR ART tool and see what study sections come up and see if there's one that's a better fit. But the third thing that you could do, which nobody ever talks about, but which is a thing you can do, a strategy that you can do at NIH, you can request, as you are sending it in, as either as a new submission or a resubmission, you can request that a type of expertise be added via ad hoc member. So that's a request. Nobody talks about this, and it's nowhere on the NIH website. And it's like one of these things that's just kind of conventional wisdom in the ether. You just have to know, which so
Right.
much of NIH is like that. It's kind of maddening.
Right.
Um,
And talking with your PO, I mean, knowing POs
yeah,
from through my years, that is something that, well, I'm actually sorry, SROs.
yeah,
That is something when they're building your study section group,
yeah,
expertise would help them in
yeah,
recruiting certain reviewers.
yeah. And it's a request that you should make before you submit. Um, this is one of those things. I've had dozens of applicants make this request, and in my experience, with a limited sample size, if an applicant makes that request of the SRO before they submit their application, like you're giving them enough time, I've never seen them say no. And so the phrase you want to use is, you can't name a person. You can't say, I want this person on there, obviously. But what you can say is, you could email the program officer, the SRO, the scientific review officer who runs the study section meeting and is an employee of CSR. And you can say, in order to get a fair and impartial review, that's the phrase you want to use, I would need XYZ expertise represented on the panel. Are you willing to add that expertise via ad hoc member? So, that's a thing that you could do if you find that there isn't a study section that is a better fit than the one that you went to originally, and you really feel like, wow, they really missed the point in a big way. You can request that expertise be added or multiple expertise be added via ad hoc member, and then that person then becomes probably your primary reviewer. They rarely say no to it because the ad hoc reviewers often phone in, so it doesn't really cost them anything. It's a little bit of time to go recruit that person, but it's not like they've got to
There's no travel, right?
yeah. So if that request is made in time, they pretty much always say yes to it, So so those are the things that I would suggest. And if you decide to, if you really, if you submit it in a very similar form, it's going to have to go in as an A1. But if you really don't want the next set of reviewers to see the summary statements from the A0 because they were off the wall and you just don't want, you want to just like wash your hands of it,
Start
make some
fresh, yeah.
changes to the application and put it in as an A0. So hopefully, while it's in the 9 months that it's been in review, you've been able to move the project along further, and maybe what was AIM 1 is now published and AIM 2 now becomes AIM 1, and you can kind of move the project further down the pipeline and change it enough that you could justify making it an A0, and then nobody ever sees the summary statements. It's just going in new. So yeah, that's a thing that I hear a lot, unfortunately. So and for anybody who's just coming in, people are cycling in and out. Feel free to put questions in the Q&A box. We do have a few more minutes. And I do want to say, David, I'm looking at the list of people here. I don't know everybody on the call, but we do have some RD folks on the call. And so one of the things that I did want to say, getting back to the list that you shared earlier in the call, a lot of RD offices have, and pre-award support offices have these checklists that they run through. And even maybe more importantly, they have checklists that they can give their applicants. So do you want to speak a little bit about checklists? Because not all offices have those. And I love it when they do, particularly when they can give a checklist to an applicant.
Right. On our funding development team, and I see one of our investigators here, we did create a checklist for the various items and where you need to put them. And there even was an annotated version of the parent funding opportunity, FOA, but there's
No.
another word now that I keep on blanking on. Yes, we did an annotated version of the parent with the information about how that associates with what you need to do associated with your particular institution.
Yeah, I love that. So that's kind of low-lying fruit if you're in an RD office that doesn't yet have a checklist like that for your own folks and for your applicants. Boy, that is like a good one to develop for your toolkit. Here's another question in our last few minutes. I'm on a tight deadline for an RFA. Any tips or tricks for how to pull together a strong application on a short timeline? Coffee, a lot of coffee. I don't know if it's your first R01. If it's not your first R01, like, people do it. It's not ideal, but if it's your first one, oof, that's hard. And I know that the RFAs, sometimes you learn about them late, or they just have really tight turnarounds. I will say that if you have an RFA in your topic, you really should put in an application to the RFA and not the parent announcement, because that's where your institute is going to look to fund that topic. Big things for RFAs in general: when you're writing the significance and innovation, read that background section of the NOFO and pull out key phrases. So you definitely want to be as responsive as possible to the NOFO. So really use phrases that you see repeated throughout the background section of the NOFO in your significance section. And in particular, if they say something like applications responsive to this NOFO would be in one of the following topics, or at least one of the following bullets, make sure you say in the significance section which one you're responding to. But in terms of pulling an application together quickly, I don't know that I have any tips for how to do that. It can be really good if you're new to it, to work from an existing application. So if you have somebody in your lab, excuse me, who's submitted an application, and it's your first application, maybe you work from that.
Yeah, I was going to say, depending on how tight the deadline is, I would suggest talking to somebody in your department, perhaps a mentor, someone who has the experience of submitting grants. And maybe, especially if it's right in your field, maybe they will have a lot of guidance as to how you can, state this thing, this is important about our research, so forth. And that'll help.
Okay, so I'm having a little bit of a coughing spasm here, but I think that's all the time we have today anyway. So Thank you, David, for joining us, and good luck to everybody on the call. We'll see you in 2 weeks.
Best of luck, everyone.
Take care. Bye-bye.